Hey, I'm Jacob. I'm 29, and if someone had told me 10 years ago that I'd one day inherit my grandfather's entire fortune, $2 million, to be exact, I would have laughed myself sick. Back then, I was sleeping in the back of a beat-up Honda Civic, counting change for coffee, and wondering how long before my luck ran out. The idea that I'd be sitting in a mahogany-paneled law office with my estranged parents glaring at me across the table? Unthinkable. The irony still makes me grin. These are the same people who kicked me out the day I turned 18. "You're a man now," my father had said, right before changing the locks. My mom didn't even look up from her wine glass. And yet there they were at the reading of my grandfather's will, dressed like they were attending a gala, pretending to mourn a man they hadn't visited in years. Growing up, my family looked perfect from the outside. We had the nice house, the manicured lawn, the picture-perfect Christmas cards. But inside? It was all rot. My mom cared about what people thought more than what any of us felt, and my dad treated success like a scoreboard. My sister, Ava, was the golden child, graceful, brilliant, and conveniently born without any opinions of her own. Me? I was the family disappointment wrapped in sarcasm and bad timing. I didn't like what they liked. I wasn't loud or charming or obsessed with money. I liked sketching, reading, and asking questions. My father didn't like being asked, like why it was okay for him to spend thousands on golf trips but not for me to apply to art school. He said I had no sense of direction. My mom said I was too emotional. Basically, I was a walking embarrassment to their social reputation. When I turned 18, they made good on their threats. One final dinner, one final lecture about manhood, and then they handed me a duffel bag and told me to figure out the world on my own. No money. No plan. Just the sound of the door locking behind me. The only one who didn't abandon me was my grandfather, my dad's father, Henry. He was the kind of man who carried his silence like armor. He'd been through wars, losses, and a family that barely deserved him, yet he always had a soft spot for me. He saw things in me that no one else bothered to. "You think before you speak, Noah," he'd say. "That's not weakness. That's wisdom." He'd let me crash on his couch when things got bad, never asked for explanations, just made coffee in the morning and acted like it was normal. He knew my parents were cruel without me saying a word. And somehow, he became more of a father to me than my actual one ever tried to be. Fast forward nearly a decade. I had a small apartment, a modest job fixing computers, and a quiet life I'd built on my own terms. My parents hadn't spoken to me in years. Ava sent me the occasional smug Christmas card showing off her latest success: a new house, a new car, a new fiancé. I always tossed them in the trash unopened. Then came the phone call that changed everything. My grandfather was gone. The loss hit me harder than I expected. He'd been my last real family. When the lawyer called and said I was required at the will reading, I figured maybe I'd get a keepsake, his watch, maybe a note. Nothing could have prepared me for what I heard that day. I walked into that office, and there they were, my parents and Ava, sitting like royalty, eyes sharp and expectant. My mom smiled, that tight, fake smile she used when she wanted something. My dad gave me the kind of nod that said he still thought I was beneath him. Ava just looked at me like I'd shown up underdressed to her party. And then the lawyer began to read. "Per the last will and testament of Mr. Henry Lawson, his entire estate, valued at approximately $3.2 million, is to be transferred solely to his grandson, Noah Lawson." The room went dead silent. I swear I could hear my father's jaw clench. Ava blinked like she'd been slapped. My mom gave this weird, strangled laugh that died halfway out of her throat. And just when I thought it couldn't get any more surreal, the lawyer added, "There are additional stipulations you'll want to hear." That's when I realized this was just the beginning. The silence in that room was thick enough to choke on. My mother was the first to recover, though her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Well," she said in that brittle, high-pitched voice she used when she was lying through her teeth. "Of course, that makes perfect sense. Noah was always close to Dad." She glanced at me with that saccharine smile that used to make me feel about 2 inches tall. "Naturally, though, he'll need our help managing things. Won't he, dear?" My father nodded like a man sealing a business deal. "Of course. $3 million is a lot of responsibility for someone who's inexperienced." His eyes flicked over me like he was appraising a used car. "Wouldn't want you making any unfortunate mistakes." Ava leaned forward, smirking. "You know he's right, Noah. Grandpa was generous, but you've never exactly been good with, well, grown-up stuff." She twirled her hair and laughed under her breath. Remember when you maxed out that credit card freshman year? I still have the photo of you trying to return a toaster for gas money. I wanted to tell her to shove it, but I stayed quiet. Because that was the thing about my family, they thrived on reactions. They wanted me defensive, emotional, the same kid they tossed aside years ago. I wasn't giving them that. The lawyer cleared his throat, sensing the temperature in the room. To clarify, he said, adjusting his glasses, Mr. Lawson's will explicitly states that the estate is to remain under Noah's sole control. There will be no trustees, no shared management, no oversight. That wiped the smiles clean off their faces. My mother's hand shot out, resting on my sleeve. Her nails dug in just enough to remind me of her power games. Sweetheart, she cooed, you know we only want what's best for you. We can guide you through all this. Think of it as a family effort. Family effort? I repeated, trying not to laugh. The same family that had cut me off like a bad investment now wanted to guide me? But the show wasn't over. My dad leaned back in his chair, voice smooth and patronizing. Your grandfather meant well, but you have to understand money like this can destroy a person. You don't want to end up reckless or naive. It's not about control, son, it's about protection. There it was again, that word, son. As if he hadn't practically disowned me a decade ago. I glanced at the lawyer. He gave a small nod, almost imperceptible, as if to say, your grandfather knew this would happen. And somehow, that steadied me. So I smiled, just enough to make them uncomfortable, and said, thanks for your concern. But I think Grandpa trusted me for a reason. Ava laughed, mean and short. Yeah, sure he did. My father's jaw flexed. My mother's hand slipped away. For the first time in my life, I watched them flounder, and I didn't feel small. When the meeting ended, I stood to leave, but my mother called after me, her voice tight. We'll talk later, Noah. You'll come by the house tonight. I paused at the door. No, I said softly. I won't. And with that, I walked out past their polished shoes, their polished lies, and the life they thought they still owned. That was the day I realized I wasn't the powerless one anymore. But I also knew my parents, they wouldn't accept defeat quietly. And I was right. Because the very next night, there was a knock on my door. And standing there, in designer heels and a cloud of perfume, was Ava. She didn't even wait for me to invite her in. Ava just brushed past me like she still owned the air I breathed, her heels clicking across my worn hardwood floor. Cute place, she said, looking around my one-bedroom apartment like she was inspecting a motel. Cozy. But you'll need something bigger now, obviously. I leaned against the doorframe. What do you want, Ava? She smiled, slow, deliberate, the kind of smile people practice in mirrors when they're trying to look harmless. Relax, little brother. I'm just here to help you adjust. You've never dealt with real money before. It's a lot of responsibility. She crossed her arms, eyes glinting. Dad and Mom are worried you'll embarrass yourself. And honestly, they're not wrong. Embarrass myself? I laughed under my breath. You mean by not handing everything over to you three? She tilted her head, feigning innocence. Oh, come on. Don't be dramatic. We just want to make sure Grandpa's legacy isn't mishandled. You're impulsive. Remember that tattoo you got when you were 19? I rolled my sleeve up just enough to show the ink a small compass on my wrist. Yeah. The one that says find your own way. Fitting, isn't it? Her eyes flickered just for a second before she composed herself again. You know, Dad says if you'd listened to him, you wouldn't have struggled all these years. That one hit harder than I wanted it to. She knew it too. Ava was always good at finding the bruise and pressing. But the thing about being cut off at 18, sleeping in your car, and building your life from scratch? It changes the way you handle pain. You stop bleeding and start calculating. So I said nothing. Just walked to the counter, poured myself a glass of water, and let the silence stretch. Ava hated silence more than anything. She needed control of the narrative. Finally, she sighed dramatically. Look, Noah, you're going to drown if you try to do this alone. We're offering you help. Dad knows investments, Mom knows the right people, and I. She smiled, twirling her hair. I know how to keep things looking good. Imagine what we could do together. Lawson family legacy strong, united, unstoppable. I set the glass down with a quiet clink. That sounds less like help, I said, and more like a hostile takeover. Her smile faltered. And that was when I realized she hadn't come to help at all. She'd come to test me to see if I was still weak, still easy to manipulate. When she finally left, perfume still lingering in the air, I thought that was the end of it. But the next morning, I got a call from my grandfather's lawyer. His tone was clipped urgent. "Noah," he said, "did you authorize any changes to the estate account?" I froze. "No." "Why?" He hesitated. "Because someone tried to. Yesterday afternoon. They claimed to represent you, but the bank flagged it. Said the woman was extremely insistent." I didn't need him to say the name. Ava. My family hadn't just crossed the line, they'd sprinted over it. And for the first time, I stopped feeling hurt. I stopped feeling small. I started feeling dangerous. That phone call snapped something clean in me. For years, I'd been bracing against my family's games, the manipulation, the guilt trips, the subtle digs that made me feel like I was still that worthless 18-year-old with a backpack full of nothing. But this was different. This was theft. That night, I drove to their house. The same suburban fortress I'd been kicked out of 11 years earlier. The porch light was on, warm and welcoming, like some nostalgic lie. Their luxury SUV sat in the driveway, spotless as ever. The place looked exactly the same except me. I wasn't the same kid walking out that door anymore. I parked across the street, engine off, and just watched. Through the front window, I could see the three of them sitting around the kitchen island. My father hunched over a laptop, my mother nursing a glass of wine, and Ava scrolling on her phone like nothing in the world could touch her. I wondered which one of them had actually gone to the bank, but it didn't matter. They were all in it together. The lawyer had already confirmed the attempt had failed. The bank froze everything until they verified my authorization. Still, the thought of them walking in there, pretending to speak for me, made my stomach twist. They weren't just entitled anymore, they were desperate. When I got home, I found an email from my landlord saying there had been multiple anonymous complaints about me being loud at all hours. I almost laughed. I lived alone and spent most nights reading in silence. It was my mother's old tactic. When she couldn't control you, she tried to ruin your reputation. Then came the texts from numbers I didn't recognize. "People are talking, Noah. Heard you're already spending the old man's money. Guess you finally found a way to buy respect." Gossip spreads fast in a small town. My parents still had the little circle, the golf club crowd, the church ladies, the same people who once believed every word my mother said. Now they had a new story to tell, that I was greedy, unstable, undeserving. It worked for a while. Friends stopped calling. My coworkers looked at me differently. And late one night, sitting at my kitchen table surrounded by unopened bills, I started to believe the lies myself. Maybe they were right. Maybe I really wasn't built for this. But then I remembered something my grandfather once said to me the year I moved out. We were sitting on his porch, him with a cup of black coffee, me with my pride barely stitched together. He'd said, "There will come a day when they'll need you to doubt yourself. That's the only way they'll win. Don't give them that." I didn't sleep much that night. I dug through my desk until I found the old envelope he'd given me on my 21st birthday, yellowed at the edges, sealed with his careful handwriting. I'd never opened it before. Inside was a single page. "Noah, the world will always try to convince you that you're lucky to have what you earn. Don't listen. You'll earn every inch of it the hard way. And when they come for you because they will, you stand tall and make them remember who you are." By the time I finished reading, I knew what I had to do. The next morning, I started documenting everything: the bank's report, the fake complaints, the rumors, every text from Ava. I built a file so thick it could crush them under its own weight if I needed to. I didn't tell anyone what I was planning. I just smiled when people whispered, nodded when my mother waved fake sweetly in public, and stayed quiet. Because silence, I realized, made them nervous. They thought I was retreating. But I was preparing. And the storm that was coming? They had no idea how ready I was for it. I started small and cold, not with speeches or dramatic confrontations, but with paper. Receipts, emails, screenshots, dates, times. I made spreadsheets like a mad scientist, building an alibi. Attempted bank access on October 7th, anonymous noise complaints filed on October 9th, social media posts seeded on October 11th. Every smear, every sly message, every whispered rumor went into a folder organized by offense and level of proof. I learned the boring things fast: what banks required to flag suspicious activity, how to pull metadata from texts, where to request police logs. It felt like learning a language I'd been expected to speak my whole life but had never bothered to study. Next, I found people who didn't treat me like a cautionary tale. I hired a financial advisor, not a flashy suit who winked at my parents' circle, but a steady woman named Mara who smelled faintly of lemon and logic. She asked me questions nobody had ever asked with patience. What do you want this money to do? Who are you when no one's watching? We built a plan that protected the estate legally and practically, separate accounts, professional trustees for certain properties, and most importantly, contingencies for harassment or attempted fraud. She literally laughed when my mother's name came up and then made me feel less ridiculous for having been afraid in the first place. Then I found a lawyer, Daniel, because some names feel right in moments of war. Daniel was not theatrical. He ran his hand along the spine of a legal folder like a man who'd read too many wills to be surprised by greed. He knew the pitfalls that families hide inside of flowers and casseroles. We met 3 times in his office, and each time I walked out feeling quieter and more dangerous. He told me my grandfather had been careful. That was the phrase he used a lot, careful. Not sentimental. Not dramatic. Careful. The estate was built like a chessboard, and my grandfather had already arranged the pieces for someone who knew how to play. With Daniel and Mara in my corner, I started to poke. I sent formal letters asking the bank for a record of the attempted access. I filed a report about the anonymous complaints with the landlord's office and requested any surveillance footage of the parking area where, coincidentally, someone had been seen loitering the day the complaints began. I asked social platforms for IP logs tied to the smear accounts. It was tedious, bureaucratic work, but it was also a clean, satisfying revenge, the kind that doesn't scream but accumulates until there's no ignoring it. People noticed. Not the awful kind of notice that leaves bruises, but a low hum of curiosity and respect. The woman at the corner bakery who once avoided my started bringing my coffee without a prompt. A neighbor who'd always been lukewarm about my presence invited me to a community meeting about local charities my grandfather used to fund. My reputation, fragile like a dishware set tied up in brown paper, was slowly being unwrapped. And my parents? They kept trying. They sent more letters, all carefully worded, all in the voice of concern, but I'd learned to treat their words like evidence instead of afflictions. I let Daniel handle the legal responses. He wrote with the flat, unromantic tone of someone who'd seen avarice up close and decided he didn't like it. One letter, in particular, pleased me, a crisp cease and desist that referenced the bank's fraud alert, the landlord's complaint investigation, and upcoming subpoenas if the harassment continued. My mother read it in a hurry and tried to play wounded. My father stuffed it into his briefcase like it was the thing that might save him. They called it overreach. The neighbors called it drama. I called it necessary. There were human moments in the middle of the paperwork. Mara taught me how to build an emergency fund and how to buy property with an eye toward legacy, not flashy headlines. Daniel sat with me over cheap takeout the night I felt rage wobble into fatigue and didn't make me perform strength I didn't feel. He told a few stories about his own family, not enough to be cliché, just enough so I wouldn't feel alone in a room full of paper. Those small, ordinary kindnesses mattered more than any legal victory. But legal threads only go so far. When the town's gossip machine started whirring again, a poorly framed article, a blurred photo on a community blog insinuating impropriety, I decided to stop hiding and start telling. I organized a modest fundraiser in my grandfather's name to repair the town library roof he had always quietly financed. No speeches about money. No grandstanding. Just people, ladders, and a banner that read "For Harold because he gave so we could give back." It was low-key, clumsy, and perfect. People who had seen my grandfather at chess nights showed up. The librarian cried. A few of the very neighbors who had once looked the other way shook my hand and said, "Your grandfather would be proud." The reaction from my parents was exactly what I expected, thin fury masquerading as concern. But the town was no longer a stage where they directed all scenes. There were witnesses now, and witnesses are annoying in the best possible sense. They make it harder for liars to get away with loud, easy things. All of this built to a single, small triumph. One rainy Thursday, the bank called Daniel. They had completed their internal investigation and found the attempted access had come from an IP address linked through a convoluted but verifiable chain of digital breadcrumbs to a device that, yes, had been used by a member of my parents' household. The bank couldn't file charges for me, but they could freeze the suspicious account activity and hand over their findings to law enforcement. Hearing that call felt like the first honest laugh I'd had in years, not bitter, not ironic. Clean. There was relief in it, sure, but more than that, there was the exhilarating, almost childlike joy of watching fairness, however slow and bureaucratic, begin to line up behind you. That night, I sat on my porch with the leather notebook my grandfather had tucked in his desk drawer, a little book of notes he'd meant for me. I ran my finger over his handwriting, the loops and crossings of a life that had built safety out of intention. He had known. He had planned. He had given me more than money. He'd given me tools and time and the permission to be better than their assumptions. I wasn't naive. I knew the road ahead would include more ugly meetings, more attempts to twist the story, maybe even a public spectacle. But I also knew I had the will and the scaffolding to stand up straight when that day came. And then, 2 days later, my phone buzzed with a headline that would force things to the surface. My parents had filed a petition, the sort of legal maneuver designed to paint a person as unstable and unable to manage their affairs. The folder I'd been building sat heavy on my lap. The notebook was open to a page where my grandfather had scribbled, "Hold steady. Let them make the noise. Truth outlasts noise." I closed the book, breathed deep, and walked into the next fight fully awake. The court date landed on a Monday. Cold, gray, silent, like the universe was watching to see what I'd do with the truth I'd been carrying all these years. They'd filed a formal petition. My parents. They claimed I was financially unstable, emotionally compromised, and easily manipulated. They even had the audacity to reference my quiet lifestyle as concerning, and my lack of public displays of wealth as evasive. Their endgame? Full guardianship over my grandfather's estate. Control. Power. All over again. But this time, I didn't walk in like the kid they'd thrown out. I walked in wearing a tailored gray suit, not flashy, just clean. Like armor. Mara sat beside me, calm and steady, and Daniel stood with a folder so thick it could have doubled as a weapon. My parents were across the aisle. My mother looked like she was auditioning for sainthood. My father had that cold executive stare that used to make me crumble. Ava wore red. Of course she did. Their lawyer stood first, painting the picture they wanted everyone to believe. I was immature. I didn't understand wealth. I lived modestly to a concerning degree. Ava even submitted a written statement calling me financially passive and easily overwhelmed by responsibility. They thought their polished voices and fake concern would sway the judge. But Daniel stood next. He didn't perform. He presented. He laid out a timeline. The attempted unauthorized access at the bank documented and confirmed by the financial institution. The anonymous noise complaints traced back to a neighbor who'd overheard Ava bragging about stirring things up. The text messages screenshotted, dated, submitted to the court. The notarized will my grandfather's language crystal clear. Any interference from my parents or Ava would void their claim to any portion of the estate. Then came the final blow. Daniel pulled out the leather notebook. My grandfather's handwriting. His final blueprint. And he read, "If they attempt to take what is not theirs, it will be proof enough that I was right to leave it in Noah's hands. He knows the value of silence. He knows how to listen. He knows how to build something slow and solid. That's what matters. That's what survives." The courtroom went still. I looked over and saw my mother's hand tightening on her purse strap. My father swallowing hard. Ava blinking furiously like the tears were just for show. The judge, a woman with sharp eyes and no patience for theatrics, delivered her decision in less than 10 minutes. Petition denied. Assets remained solely under Noah Lawson's control. Any further attempts to interfere would result in sanctions. My parents didn't look at me as I left. But Ava did. That same smirk was gone now. Her lips pressed tight, her eyes dark. And I understood then for the first time that she hadn't just wanted the money. She'd wanted to erase the fact that I'd made it without them. And now she couldn't. In the weeks that followed, the ripple effect was swift. My father was asked to step down from his company's advisory board. Reputational concerns, they called it. My mother's precious social circle dried up faster than spilled wine on a linen tablecloth. Invitations stopped. Rumors swirled. And Ava? Her fiancé walked. Apparently, seeing her attempt to destroy her own brother over money wasn't part of his long-term vision. She moved back in with my parents. 3 of them, back under one roof, watching the world shrink around them. Meanwhile, I didn't gloat. I didn't spike the football. I just lived. I moved into a modest home outside of town, the kind with quiet mornings and creaky floors. I invested in the community library my grandfather loved. Started a scholarship fund in his name. Spoke at a youth workshop about resilience, and only once said, Sometimes the people who give you the hardest time are the ones who secretly fear your strength. People clapped. I didn't need it. But I felt my grandfather in that room. One night, I drove past the old family house. The porch light was off. The lawn was wild. The shutters were starting to peel. And I didn't feel hate. I felt finished. They hadn't broken me. They'd built the fire I now walked through. Every insult, every exile, every cold shoulder, it had taught me something they never learned. You don't earn strength by being given things. You earn it by surviving what others never thought you could. I parked. Sat there. And whispered just loud enough for the night to hear. You were wrong about me. All of you. Then I drove away. And this time, I wasn't looking back.